after we talk about this. Hey, folks. So it is April the 14th, and we're going to start a new unit. This one's called Political Revolutions, and this is during the same time frame as the unit we just finished, Industrialization and Imperialism. However, this is going to cover some different themes about the time period, such as Romanticism, which is like it's an art and a political movement and a literature movement. It's also a philosophical movement. It's where the West and Europe moves away from reason. Like they look at things like some of the products of the Enlightenment, like what pure reason can give you. Well, pure reason's what led to the atrocities of the French Revolution. And so people were disgusted with that. And so they started looking more to things at an emotional level as kind of like a pureness in nature and stuff like that. Not necessarily like, well, let me use my super brain to try to figure out the world in mathematical equations. So, but it's also going to have time period to do with more democracy throughout the world as well. So another thing, progress reports come out on Friday, and you need to make sure if you're missing a study island assignment, you go back and do that, because I can't accept a grade any later than Thursday for the progress reports. So if you got a 0, it's going to show up in your progress report. Study island is the biggest problem right now. If you haven't done your quiz, do it. All right. So, and that's why I chose this picture. I forgot the name of it. It's a famous painting, but like this is like the whole theme of Romanticism right there. Just have this guy. He's looking over nature itself and its chaos. He's admiring it, but at the same time, he's kind of small in the big picture. So, political revolution, 1715, 1914. So, I'm going to go through about 4 of these. Going to keep it short. And this is like my favorite period. Like my favorite authors are the ones who write this period. Some of the philosophers that I prefer to read up on are from this period. A couple I didn't really disagree with, but I like to read their stuff, and a couple that I'm really into. So it's time of a lot of religious change as well. This is where you find a lot of the denominations we have today, like Christianity and stuff, is going to really develop way after the Reformation, right? And so, and of course, next year we'll talk about what's going on in the U.S. of A. But that's the thing. The United States is going to become part of the world community. And so world history is going to be United States history. United States history is going to be part of the world history. So it's going to mush together as we get into the late 1800s. And that's true for most countries. It's true for most countries. Their history becomes part of world history. All right, as we start our units, I normally start out with vocabulary. I do the same thing in 11th grade as well. So if you know what a term means, why bother writing it down? But if you don't know what it means, you might want to jot down a shortened definition. I have tried to underline the key points for you. So this is a time period that starts out with a lot of what we call absolute monarchy. We ended off your textbook with discussing this, the divine right kings, where they could make all the laws. And you remember, as time went on, the countries moved away from them. So a political system where the ruler is chosen by heredity, that's monarchy, and uses power to control all aspects of politics. That's absolute. Like Louis XIV said, I am the state. That means if you're the state, you're the government, you're the law, you're the military, you're the police, you're the judges, you're everything except the people. So the next term is limited monarchy. And this is where things are going to move towards. This is where England moved towards. It's where they tried to move France towards, but the king resisted and the radicals took over, and so the king had his head chopped off. Political system where the power of the monarch is limited by a constitution. So remember, a constitution, its whole point is limitation. A constitution is about limiting the power of government, because a government is always at its core limitless. unless you limit it, which is what a constitution does. And I mean limitless is like the authority it assumes. And why not? It has the military, it has the power. So you got to find out a way peacefully to keep that in check. Divine right. Belief that a monarch's power is granted by God. And this goes back to absolute monarchy. Why would you rebel against the king if he was placed there by God himself? That would be sacrilege and it would be futile because you're immortal. So, like, it really goes into play. Of course, the link between religion and monarchy is ancient and it goes through almost all cultures. You can look at even tribal people, island people, and you will find a relationship between either their religion, as in their gods, or at least the priesthood and their monarchies. So that's really common throughout the world. Political revolution, the overthrow of one government and its replacement with another. Oh yeah. And this is a period where we see that. And they can come from generals like Napoleon, who was kind of a counter-revolutionary in many ways. And that's a debate historians have. Is Napoleon the fruits of a revolution, or is he counter-revolution? I think he's the fruits of the revolution because ultimate democracies historically always turn out to have a dictator in the end. They always select one. How do you think Hitler got power? He was popularly elected by his people. Same with Mussolini. They loved them. You could look at Athens. They had supreme democracy, and they would constantly give up power to single individuals. Happened over and over. And France did the same thing. So if you have unchecked democracy, they always choose a strong leader, and then they give up all their democracy. It's weird. It's self-defeating. All right, y'all ready for the next one? All right, take that as you guys. What are you doing? That was weird. All right. Oh no, there's more terms. So, all right, slide 204. Once again, more vocabulary terms. If you know what a term is, you don't have to write it down. Some of these are things that we went over in the book. So, sovereignty, freedom from external control, and power over a government. So you're free from. So if you are sovereign, that means nobody controls you. And if you're sovereign, that means you have control of a government. In America, ideally, the people are sovereign, the voter, and our votes control the government. Supposed to, right? So human beings here, everyday citizens, are supposed to be the sovereign. So we have the sovereignty, we have the political power. Whereas in absolute monarchy, only the king is sovereign. The people aren't sovereign, they're subjects. That means they have no power. Constitutionalism. The government should be limited by a constitution or set laws and policies. So, Constitution is the supreme law of the land. Like I said, it limits a government, but it can also guarantee rights and liberties. It puts it out, you cannot take these things, or here's the way that you can do it. Or, hey, government, this is what you can do. But don't do that other stuff, because we'll have somebody else do it. The bourgeois. This is the middle class in revolutionary France. It can also be called the bourgeoisie, like in England. So we're going to see, as we've talked about, the Industrial Revolution. You have more and more people, the growth of this merchant class and this class of people who are bankers, lawyers, teachers, doctors, and things like that, where they can be kind of like in the upper class, but they're not lower class anymore. You can even have factory workers, managers, stuff like that. You got more and more people with spending money, their own property. They're not nobility. They're not peasantry. They're something else. And people don't quite know what to do with that yet. It's one of those things that the old laws didn't really cover very well. And that's going to be another reason for either revolution or for reform. If most of the people are free and they have cash and they're educated, you can't treat them like serfs and nobles anymore. That doesn't fit. They're more modern. They have more rights, and they believe that everyone has rights. Estate, division of a social class in revolutionary France between nobility, clergy, and commoners. And so when we talk about the French Revolution, we're going to see that there are the three estates: nobility, clergy, and commoners. And those three estates are going to be divided up for representation in the old Estates General, which is like their version of Parliament. And as we kind of talked about before, that's where the revolution in France is going to start. Now, we're going to talk a lot about the American Revolution next year. And the French Revolution comes afterwards. But the French Revolution is going to be the one that's going to set so many things in place that are going to replay in modern times. We're going to see this, even similarities between the French Revolution, even go to the Chinese Revolution a couple hundred years later. Cambodia, a lot of different countries. Nationalism, heightened patriotism, and devotion to the supremacy of one's nation. So a nationalist isn't just somebody who cares about their country. It's deeply ingrained culturally. And in some people, it almost has religious aspects to it, to where there's certain things that are ritualistic you do because you are prideful of your nation. But nationalism isn't just love for nation. Often somebody who's a nationalist, in this period especially, despised other nations. They saw their nation as the best, like it was a competition. My nation's so great, and our place is to be better than yours no matter what. And we're going to see that it's going to have myth attached to it as well during this period. And those myths are going to be really exemplified when we talk about World War II next year. We'll talk about Nazism, where you're going to have the idea of myths made out of thin air largely. Try to explain a kind of nationalism that has a religious fervor, a murderous fervor. And so it can really go out of control. All right, let's go 3 or 4. Oh yeah, so this is this is a painting of a French salon. So it was in places like this where like nobility would come together and have some drinks and some snacks and stuff like that. And the whole point was to go have conversations on new ideas, sciences that were coming up at the time, politics, philosophy, people's rights, and things like that, in kind of like an entertaining way, right? So these were people already well off. They weren't looking to change things within their governments to better themselves. But these places would come up with ideas that others would take and run off with. So the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment's going to be, it's essentially what's going to give birth to the idea of modern America, as we'll see later. A period of great political thought philosophy during the 17th through the 18th centuries, following the Reformation. Also known as the Age of Reason, for its focus on logic and human intellect for the betterment of humanity. And so this is where the idea of humanism comes up. We've seen the term humanism before in the Renaissance. The idea that human beings of their own power can improve their lives through forms of government, science, and thought. And so here in the Enlightenment, you have the idea that the universe is rational and it's reasonable, and everything around you is understandable as long as you find out its secrets. But not in the old way of the Middle Ages, bless you, or even the Renaissance when they had alchemy and astrology and things like that, where they were trying to go through these old myths that borderline magic. Now it's more about secular knowledge, right? So during this period, skepticism of the old ways and movement towards individualism was taken. So skepticism. So being skeptical of things that were superstitious, perhaps, or in the Renaissance and in the Middle Ages, They took what the ancient Greeks and Romans had to say as fact, unquestioned authority. But during the Enlightenment, they start discovering maybe Ptolemy was wrong about the human body. Maybe Aristotle was wrong about women and childbirth and things like that. And they find out, yeah, they were wrong. They were wrong. Maybe Ptolemy was wrong about the universe. So they're seeing what's coming up in like discoveries of the age of science about the rotation and the orbit of planets. And they're like, oh gosh, the whole universe is different than we thought. What else could be, right? And individualism, the saying that every single person has a potential and a value. During this period, we gain the ideas of personal liberty, progress, the ability to get better, toleration. So it comes from the Latin word tollere. It means to bear. You endure people who are different, and you can be better for it. Constitutional government and separation between church and state. And why a separation between church and state? It's because these people have had all those religious wars, remember? And so they're like, well, I guess we don't need the king to go out and persecute people because they don't go to his church. Maybe we should have toleration. So that's what the idea of church and state is. And they saw the corruption that could happen to a church. If you remember, we saw in England that some churches were in full-on rebellion because the government was telling them what prayer books to use. And so one doesn't want to go into the other at times. That's what they're saying. There can be a danger. There can be a danger when your king kills people for their faith. There can be a danger when your church is told what to do by the king. So, all right, you ready for the next one? All right, last one. What's that? What flag is that? Yeah, it's the old English flag with the Crusader cross on it. That's the old one, not the modern one. Yeah, that's not the Union Jack you see now, like on the back of cars. Yeah, this is Thomas Jefferson, and this is the Declaration of Independence. So it's presenting it. So this is my last for today. Effects of the Enlightenment. So the Enlightenment, we got all these ideas we're talking about, and like so many things. And we're going to talk about this briefly again next year on some of the particulars from the Enlightenment in America, right? And so we have the expansion of political rights and limited government following the revolutions in America and in Europe. America is going to have the first Enlightenment-based revolution and government. And other European powers are going to look at this in fear and some jealousy, as France will be, because then they're going to try to have one too, and it's going to get crazy. Colonial independence movements developed in the Americas, and the spread of nationalism in Europe and its colonies. So the spread of nationalism, really the birth of it, is going to be Napoleon in a lot of ways. Because as Napoleon's armies go through countries, invade and take over, a lot of people are going to realize, I don't know what I am, but I know I'm not French, and I know I don't like them being here. And so as the French armies are defeated and driven back, you're going to have a renewed sense of patriotism that people didn't feel in the Middle Ages. They would have fealty for the king, kind of like a celebrity, like a religious celebrity. But they didn't really think of themselves as like Englishmen or Germans or anything like that. But after the Napoleonic Wars, a lot of people are going to look back and be like, I am part of something that's bigger than myself. It is my country. And unfortunately, though, we're going to see that sense of nationalism is going to lead to bloody wars, especially like the First World War. Like this macho competition, and now with new industrialized and scientific weapons used at a mass scale, it's just going to be like terrible, terrible stuff. But It's going to have to wait till the 20th century. But don't worry, there are a lot of people going to die in the 19th too. In fact, one sad fact, more people have died in the 20th century from the hands of their own government than in all wars combined. We call it democide. So you're more likely statistically in the 20th century to be executed. And that's because there were just so many genocides and persecutions. But on that sad note, we're going to end that for now. Hey, make sure you do your study island, and I'm going to download this as a PDF and send it up in the Google Classroom. All right, see you later, kids.